Like a Dragon, Ishin is a game that requires a bit of explanation. The game itself is a side story in the Like a Dragon series, which was up until recently known in the West as Yakuza. Its original release came all the way back in 2014, but the game's heavy reliance on Edo period Japanese history meant that its initial version was only released in Japan. Some 9 years later, the game has finally been localized for international audiences, and dramatically updated with modern technology. So can this aging brawler still hold up on current-gen consoles and PC, and has the game's Unreal Engine 4 powered makeover come at any performance cost? It's very important to understand what Like a Dragon Ishin is and what it isn't. This is a game that was originally developed around the PlayStation 3 with graphics and scope constrained around 7th gen console hardware. It was also released on PS4, but that version was very similar to PS3 as you might expect. Obviously that wouldn't hold up especially well at the moment, so the developers at Ryuga Gotoku Studio have taken a sort of hybrid approach to updating the game, lying somewhere between a remaster and a remake using Epic's Unreal Engine 4. The game logic and animation seem very similar to the original game, but the renderer has been swapped out for Unreal Engine 4's, and assets have been modified or replaced to suit the new visual targets. I'm comparing the PS3 version running under emulation against the Series X release here. In side-by-side comparisons, the improvements are often vast. Lighting in particular looks totally different. The new version has very good looking baked lighting effects that provide more satisfying indirect shade. Light bounce is evident across a wide range of conditions, with an especially impressive appearance during daylight hours. It's nothing too out of the ordinary for a modern title, but there is a good level of detail here, and it absolutely blows the original game out of the water. Character models have also seen a comprehensive upgrade. The overall designs are similar, but the modeling in many cases has been more or less completely redone. Hair appears to be strand-based, skin textures and lighting response seem much more realistic, and facial geometry has been refined. Understandably, these improvements apply mostly to the main cast. Side characters also exhibit visual upgrades, though they appear more closely derived from the original work. And the quality of character assets varies a lot depending on the scene. In cutscenes they often look quite excellent, but gameplay models are substantially more primitive. Those cutscenes are a strong visual standout in this new version. The dramatic, action-oriented direction of the original work really shines with higher grade digital actors and modern lighting. All the Unreal Engine 4 niceties are on display here, including a creamy and smooth bokeh depth of field, and any of the game's PS3 era visual faults are usually kept out of frame or at least out of focus. With that said, it is important to keep expectations in check with this game, because there are a lot of visual holdovers from the original release and they can be distracting. The most substantial fault comes down to environmental asset quality. Most of the game's environmental geometry and basic texture work are essentially unchanged. Expect to see the same angular geometry across the game world and the same relatively simple 2D art plastered across most surfaces, sometimes at a higher resolution, but otherwise identical to the original work. At a distance, it doesn't stand out very much, but at close range, you don't get the complex geometry-rich modeling that we're used to seeing in modern games. Ishin often has the sort of stark, boxy look that older games often exhibit when rendered at high resolutions. Lighting issues pop up from time to time as well, though these problems are mostly restricted to the game's interior spaces. The Unreal Engine 4 conversion hasn't done a whole lot for the lighting here, which often looks very plain and dated. Character models don't correspond at all to environmental lighting conditions either. I have to imagine there might be technical constraints based on how the original game was built that restrict the kinds of improvements that are easily possible here. Animation is also a sore spot. Movements in combat look fine in isolation, but in motion the results look stiff with no real transitions between poses and actions. On a gamepad it feels pretty good to control, but the on-screen results often look comic, which is especially noticeable when firing guns. The reused animations and cutscenes fare better, though the facial movement lacks the fidelity that would be necessary to work well with the upgraded character models. Despite those issues, I think Like a Dragon Ishin works pretty well in its new Unreal Engine 4 fueled guise. Physically plausible lighting goes a long way towards making a game look modern, and that holds true even if its assets are relatively basic. Compared with prior Yakuza or Like a Dragon outings, Ishin is a bit of a mixed bag. 2020's Yakuza, Like a Dragon, and yes, this naming scheme is extremely confusing, ran on the proprietary Dragon engine, an engine that was used to power last-gen games in the series. Asset quality in recent Dragon engine titles is mostly satisfactory and is a clear step above the generation-straddling Ishin, but the lighting quality in those games was a bit of a mixed bag in my experience. During nighttime conditions with plenty of individual light sources, the results were presentable enough, but daytime scenes with a reliance on indirect lighting tended to have very uniform color. There were definite visual high points, the cutscenes were very well directed, and featured detailed character models, but Ishin isn't exactly a slouch there either. It's not clear exactly where future series entries will land. With Ryuga Gotoku Studio, developers openly musing about switching to Unreal, but I'd say Ishin is a vote of confidence towards an engine change, or at least a sign that the aging Dragon engine needs a substantial overhaul. Current-gen consoles showcase the expected differences in rendering resolution in Like a Dragon Ishin, but there are some curious variations in the visual settings as well. On the pixel count front, PS5 and Series X both come in at a straight 1440p resolution in their sole visual modes, without any signs of dynamic res. Series S clocks in at 1080p, again at a fixed pixel count. Head-to-head, the PS5 and Series X releases offer a small but perceptible increase in detail over the S, though all platforms look smooth and clean. There doesn't appear to be any sort of upsampling, so on a 4K set, the final resolved image detail does look a little bit soft, though at a typical viewing distance, the consoles hold up well enough. A quick side-by-side comparison reveals some unexpected platform differences, however. The PS5 has a toned-down ambient occlusion effect than the Xbox Series consoles and has sharper shadow maps as well. This looks more like a filtering difference to me, though it's possible that shadow map resolution differs somewhat here. This will come down to personal preference, but I personally prefer the more heavily filtered shadows on Xbox, and I think the more extensive ambient occlusion coverage looks somewhat better in most scenes. I can't imagine that this settings divergence is intended, so hopefully it can be fixed in a patch. All current gen machines target 60 FPS, though there are some caveats. Series X delivers a very solid 60 FPS update outside of a few select scenarios. Firstly, the game's fully animated cutscene sequences play back at 30 FPS, and with uneven frame pacing to boot. These do seem to drop the occasional frame, but the primary issue is that uneven frame cadence, which gives them a slightly jerky appearance during certain moments. Dialogue scenes hit 60 FPS, unlike the main cinematics, but the game does drop a couple of frames when the camera cuts for some reason. It's not a big deal and it's not too noticeable, but it does technically present as a decent sized stutter on a frame time graph. Finally, I did notice that the game can drop a frame or two during certain intense battle sequences, specifically during some of the QuickTime event cutaways. In general combat and exploration though, the game is a locked 60 FPS. PS5 is basically a perfect mirror of Series X. It offers 60 FPS in most gameplay, with unsteady 30 FPS cinematics, and those drop frames on camera angle changes during dialogue. Just like Series X, it's a pretty smooth experience on the whole. Series S lags somewhat behind the premium consoles. The same issues occur again here, and we do get some small framerate dips in busy town areas as well from time to time. Certain dialogue moments and QuickTime cutaways can also incur sustained framerate dips. Series S comes a bit closer in graphical fidelity to the Series X and PS5 here than we usually see, and the console seems to pay for it in some of the more demanding shots. So that's current gen console accounted for, but what about PC? This is an Unreal Engine 4 based title running on DirectX 12, so typically we'd expect a bit of a stutterfest due to shader compilation issues. Thankfully, Ishin seems to dodge this issue. The opening sections play back without any apparent compilation stutter, at least as of the latest patch. Now, with the initial launch patch installed, Ishin did suffer from some substantial stutters, particularly during the early combat sections, but the notes for the latest patch indicate that some sort of solution has been reached. A fresh playthrough with reinstalled drivers and a cleared shader cache didn't surface any clear compilation issues. It's not totally clear what's going on because there's no noticeable pre-compilation step, but the issue appears to be fixed for now. Annoyingly though, the game's other performance hangups all make a reappearance from the console versions. The dropped frames on camera cuts return during dialogue sequences, and the 30 FPS cutscenes are back as well. Even when targeting high frame rates, these are still pegged at that unstable 30 FPS update, which is pretty distracting. On the plus side, Ishin does come packed with support for XESS and FSR 2.1. FSR 2 in its quality mode is often an upgrade over native 4K rendering, with a clear and less aliasing prone rendition of fine geometric details. It does tend to suffer from some shimmering on clothing at certain angles though, which can be distracting. The lower base resolution FSR 2 options have very similar image characteristics in stills, though foliage does tend to become a bit artifact-ridden in the performance and ultra-performance modes. Disocclusion artifacting can be apparent as well, especially with those more aggressive upsampling options, though it's not overly distracting, I would say. The PC version at 4K at maximum settings compared to consoles does manage to produce a substantially more detailed image than the consoles can muster. It's a reasonable upgrade, though the increase in clarity isn't hugely impactful in general play. Outside of resolution and upsampling, the visual options are very basic, consisting of a few toggles and selections that don't seem to offer any visual enhancements over consoles, with basic selections for reflections, textures, SSAO, shadows, and geometric quality. The PC version at maximum settings is actually a bit of a hybrid between PS5 and Xbox Series. The ambient occlusion is more restrained, just like the PS5, while shadow maps have the more soft filtered resolve that is characteristic of the Xboxes. I suspect most decent machines should be perfectly capable of hitting those maximum settings at good resolutions, judging from how little my RTX 4090 is taxed here. It's been a while since I played very much of a Yakuza or Like a Dragon game, but I enjoyed my time with Ishin. This is a very story-centric and cutscene-heavy brawler that has all the flair and humor that the series is known for. Combat has a bit of a PS2-style character to it, with simple mechanics and clearly telegraphed enemy moves, but it's responsive and satisfying. I don't think that anyone will mistake Ishin for the latest big-budget behemoth, even with its visual upgrades, but I found the mix of action, narrative, and amusing diversions to be perfectly compelling on its own terms. The overall approach taken to the visuals is similar to a handful of UE4-driven game updates that we've seen in recent times. Crisis Core Reunion in particular comes to mind, and just like that game, Ishin looks reasonably good while still reusing a lot of the original work. Improvements to lighting and key assets go a long way towards making the game look and feel like a modern title, even if on close inspection, its PS3 roots are obvious. Performance is mostly good as well, though the cutscene issues do annoy. Like a Dragon, Ishin offers compelling visual upgrades over its initial outing, and the game holds up well. For fans of the series, it's an easy recommendation. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at digitalfoundry.net for exclusive and early access content. And to get in touch, just use Twitter. Thanks for watching.